Training represents a significant expenditure for most employers. However, it's historically been viewed tactically rather than strategically, which means that training is seen as a short-term activity rather than one that has longer-term effects on organizational success. Training is the development and delivery of information people will use on their jobs. Training can indeed help an organization accomplish its goals, addressing strategic issues and helping the company develop business-critical skills, competencies, and processes will add value in a way that simply training to run the business as usual cannot. Additionally, treating training strategically can help reduce the tendency of managers to think that training alone can solve most employee or organizational problems. With a strategic focus, the organization is more likely to assess whether training can actually address the issues and what else might be able to be done. Not all training is effective. Only 1/4 of respondents to a survey said their training programs measurably improved business performance, and most companies don't measure training effectiveness. To be a strategic investment, training must align with company goals and contribute to the achievement of key performance indicators. In other words, it must produce positive results. Training investments vary by industry as well as by organization size. Surprisingly, organizations with fewer than 500 employees invest more per employee than larger organizations do. This is likely because of the significant fixed costs of developing training programs that are spread across fewer employees. Highly regulated industries like finance, insurance, banking, real estate, and healthcare all tend to invest more in training. This is also reflected in the content areas for training investments. Mandatory and compliance training is the #1 content domain companies provide. Companies invest in training with the expectation that results will improve. Training focused on individual performance and capability should lead to enhanced skills, greater ability to adapt and innovate, better self-management, and performance improvement. Organization-wide improvements should be seen in lower employee turnover, investments in effectiveness and productivity, more profitability and reduced costs, improved quality and customer service, and increased human capital. Without ongoing training, organizations may not have staff members with the knowledge, skills, and abilities, known as KSAs, needed to compete effectively. Training can also affect organizational competitiveness by boosting retention of employees. One reason that many individuals choose to stay with or leave organizations is the availability of career training and development opportunities. Employers who invest in training and developing their employees may enhance employee retention. Knowledge management is the way an organization identifies and leverages knowledge to be competitive. It's the art of creating value by using intellectual capital, which is what the organization knows. Knowledge management is a consensus effort to capture the explicit tactic knowledge of workers in the organization so that it can be shared and enhanced. Job performance, training, and employee learning must be integrated to be effective. Organizations find that training experiences that use real business problems to advance employee learning are better than approaches that do not. Rather than separating the training experience from the context of actual job performance, trainers can incorporate everyday business issues as learning examples, thus increasing the realism of training exercises and scenarios. For a global firm, the most brilliant strategies will not improve competitiveness unless the company has well-trained employees throughout the world that can carry them out. A global look at training is important as firms establish and expand operations worldwide. Components of intercultural competence require attention when training expatriates for global assignments. First, cognitive. What does the person know about other cultures? Second, emotional. How does the person view other cultures, and how sensitive is the person to cultural customs and issues? And finally, behavioral. How does the person act in intercultural situations? Building the capacity for all employees to work smoothly with diverse individuals is essential to competitive success. Certain legal compliance considerations will ensure the effectiveness of your training and development initiatives. One concern centers on the criteria and practices used to select individuals for inclusion in training programs. Since training can be an opportunity to advance in the organization, considering only job-related factors that do not result in disparate impact is important. Also, failure to accommodate individuals with disabilities in training can expose organizations to equal employment opportunity lawsuits. Using psychological assessments to identify soft skills like emotional intelligence falls under the uniform guidelines and must be validated. Another legal issue involves requiring employees to sign training contracts to protect the costs and time invested in specialized employee training. Finally, the Department of Labor has ruled that non-exempt employees who are trained outside normal working hours, such as at home by completing web-based classes, must be compensated for their time. This is particularly challenging if employees access online training during off-duty hours. Several federal laws either explicitly or implicitly require organizations to train their employees. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has extensive mandates for employee safety training. EEO laws strongly urge employers to provide training regarding harassment prevention, diversity, and inclusion. Supervisory staff should receive training to ensure their decisions and actions comply with the complex array of employment laws. Accurate record-keeping related to required training is important to demonstrate that the organization is meeting its obligations. Training is the development and delivery of information people will use in their jobs. Some common groupings of training include legally required, basic skills, job and technical, and soft skills. Legally required training ensures that organizations comply with various mandated legal requirements like OSHA and equal employment opportunity, and that training is given to all employees upon hire with periodic refreshers. Basic and remedial skills training provides foundational skills that new employees may lack, like literacy, English language proficiency, and so on. Job and technical training enables employees to perform their jobs better, like product knowledge, technical processes, procedures, and customer relations. And soft skills training improves organizational working relationships, like interpersonal communication, conflict resolution, and so on, as well as the organization's culture, like things like ethics. Organizations seeking to remain competitive are now providing training in all of these vital areas. Orientation, which is the planned introduction of a new employee to their jobs, coworkers, and the organization, is offered by most employers. Unfortunately, without good planning, new employee orientation sessions can come across as boring, irrelevant, and a waste of time to both new employees and their department supervisors and managers. But well-designed and delivered orientation can be very effective. Among the decisions to be made when planning for new employee orientation are what to present and when to present it. Too much information on the first day leads to perceptions of ineffective onboarding. Several shorter sessions over a longer period of time, bringing in as much information as needed, are more effective. Effective orientation achieves several key purposes. It establishes a favorable employee impression of the organization and the job. It provides organization and job information, enhances interpersonal acceptance by coworkers, and builds new employees' network of resources. It accelerates socialization and integration of the new employee into the organization, and it ensures that the employee's performance and productivity begin more quickly. One way to improve the efficiency of orientation is to use electronic resources. Most employers have implemented some kind of electronic onboarding activities to improve their employee orientation efforts. New employees log on and review much of the general material on organizational history, structure, products and services, mission, and other background information instead of sitting in a classroom where the information is delivered in person or by video. Using these interactive features of digital onboarding can make the process more engaging and informative. It can also create excitement for new employees. To determine the effectiveness of an orientation training program, evaluation using specific metrics is appropriate. Measurement should address the success of both the orientation program and the new hires themselves. Suggested metrics include the following: tenure turnover rate. What percentage of new hires left the organization in 6 months or less? New hires failure factor. What percentage of the total annual turnover was new hires? Employee upgrade rate. What percentage of new employees received high performance ratings? And finally, development program participation rate. What percentage of new employees have moved on to training or promotion to higher jobs? Successfully integrating new hires is important, and measuring the degree of success allows the orientation program to be managed well. The way in which a firm plans, organizes, and structures its training affects the way employees experience the training, which in turn influences the effectiveness of training. The better the upfront planning is, the better the actual training is likely to be. This planning helps the organization identify what is needed for employee performance before training begins so that there's better alignment between training and strategic needs. Then the follow-up after training brings the process full circle to determine how performance has been impacted. An orderly approach to training follows a purposeful process called instructional systems design. Instructional Systems Design, or ISD, is a step-by-step process to ensure that the right learning materials are provided to the right people at the right time. A popular model called the ADDIE framework is often used to explain this process. The ADDIE model includes 5 key phases. First is assessment. The performance problem or issue is clarified, resource budgets are determined, and the learning environment and learners' existing knowledge and skills are identified. Then comes design, which is a macro-level phase where learning objectives and media selection are determined. Next is development, a micro-level phase where content is solidified, instructional materials are created, and pilot are tested. Then delivery, where training is delivered to a target audience. And finally evaluation, where assessments and measures are taken to determine the effectiveness of the training. While there are 5 distinct phases of the ISD process, in most cases the phases overlap. Although the process appears to be linear, it's actually iterative. It is common to recycle back to an earlier phase when information is uncovered at later stages. Needs assessment measures the competencies of an organization, a group, or an individual as they relate to what's required. It's necessary to find out what is happening and what should be happening before deciding if training will help, and if so, what kind of training is needed. Identifying gaps in performance is key to the assessment process. Effective training planning efforts consider the following questions. Is there really a need for training? Who needs to be trained? Who will do the training? What form will the training take? How will knowledge be transferred to the job? And how will the training be evaluated? The first step in assessing training needs is analyzing what training might be necessary. There are 3 sources used to analyze training needs. Training needs can be diagnosed by analyzing organizational outcomes and looking at future organizational needs. A part of planning for training is identifying the KSAs that will be needed now and in the future as both jobs and the organization change. Both internal and external forces will influence training and must be considered when doing organizational analysis. A second level of analyzing training needs involves reviewing the jobs and tasks performed. Comparing worker skills in a job category to the skills needed for successful job performance can identify gaps that can be filled by training. The third means for diagnosing training needs focuses on individuals and how they perform their jobs. The most common approach for making individual analysis involves using performance appraisal data. To assess training needs through the performance appraisal process, a supervisor first determines an employee's performance strengths and inadequacies in a formal review. Then the supervisor can design training to help the employee overcome the weaknesses and enhance their strengths. Obtaining this kind of input can be useful in building support for the training from those who will be trained, particularly because they are well positioned to help identify training needs. There are 2 basic elements of creating learning objectives. First, identifying after-training behaviors, and second, developing appropriately stated objectives. 3 possible forces for training objectives can be knowledge, skill, and attitude. Knowledge is about imparting cognitive information and details to trainees, like understanding how a new product works. Skill is about developing behavioral changes in how jobs and various task requirements are performed, like improving speed on an installation. And finally, attitude is about creating interest in and awareness of the importance of something, like sexual harassment training. The success of training should be measured in terms of the objectives that were set before it took place. When creating learning objectives, it's helpful to start at the end by specifying what the learner should be able to do after completing the training. This type of thinking guides the design and development of the training. Another key consideration is that useful objectives are measurable. For an example, an objective that a new sales clerk might be able to demonstrate the ability to explain the function of each product in the department within 2 weeks. This objective is specific and can be evaluated by the trainer or the employee's supervisor. Most organizations do not have an unlimited amount of valuable resources such as time and money. Training competes for other HR and non-HR programs to secure financial and time support from the organization's leadership. Since training is seldom an unlimited budget item, and because organizations have multiple training needs, prioritization is necessary. Ideally, management looks at training needs in relation to its strategic plans as part of the organization's change process. Then, training needs can be prioritized on the basis of objectives. Conducting the training most needed to improve organizational performance will produce visible results more quickly. In the design phase, learning objectives, session structure, and resources are identified. Whether job-specific or broader in nature, training must be established to address specific objectives. Effective training design considers the learners and instructional strategies, as well as how to maximize the transfer of training from class to the job site. Different approaches are possible because learning is a complex psychological process. For the training design to be effective and produce learning, each of the elements must be considered, including learner characteristics, instructional strategies, and training transfer. Let's take a look. Those learner characteristics include the ability to learn, motivation to learn, self-efficacy, perceived utility and value, and learning styles. Instructional strategies include practice and feedback, overlearning, behavioral modeling, error-based examples, and reinforcement and immediate confirmation. Finally, transfer of training includes an overview of training content, the strategic link, supervisor support, opportunity, and accountability. Training design is all about creating content that meets your audience learning and development needs. Learner readiness means that individuals have the ability to learn, have the motivation to learn, have high confidence, see the value in learning, and have a learning style that fits the training. Learners must possess basic skills, such as fundamental reading or math proficiency, and sufficient cognitive abilities. Organizations may discover that some workers lack the cognitive ability to comprehend their training. Some have found that a significant number of job applicants and current employees lack the reading, writing, and math skills needed to learn on the job. Employers might deal with the lack of basic employee skills in several ways. First, offer remedial training to existing employees who need it. Second, test and hire workers who already have those necessary skills, or work with local schools to help provide better education for potential hires for jobs. A person's desire to learn training content, referred to as motivation to learn, is influenced by multiple factors. Learners must possess self-efficacy, which refers to people's belief that they can successfully learn the training program content. For learners to be ready for and receptive to training content, they must believe that it's possible for them to learn the material. Training that's viewed as useful is more likely to be used on the job. Perceived utility or value of training is affected by a need to improve, the likelihood that training will lead to improvement, and the practicality of training for use on the job. For training to be used on the job, learners must perceive a close relationship between the training and the things they want in their work performance. Effective learning requires the application of 3 learning styles in training. Auditory learners learn best by listening to someone else tell them about training content. Visual learners think in pictures and figures. They need to see the purpose and process for the training. And finally, tactile learners must get their hands on the training resources and use them. Trainers who address all of these styles by using multiple training methods can present more effective training. In addition, training design must sometimes address special issues presented by adult learning, which involves the way in which adults learn differently than do younger people. Certainly, the training design considers that all the trainees are adults, but adults come with widely varying learning styles, experiences, and personal goals. There are 5 principles for designing training for adults who need to know why they're learning something, need to be self-directed, bring more work-related experiences into the learning process, enter into a learning experience with a problem-centered approach to learning, and are motivated to learn by both extrinsic and intrinsic factors. The success of training efforts depends on understanding and adapting training to the needs of a learner. Practice, feedback, overlearning, behavioral modeling, error-based examples, and reinforcement are strategies that are frequently used when designing a training experience. Let's take a look. For some training, it's important that learners practice what they've learned and get feedback on how they've done so they can improve. Active practice occurs when trainees perform job-related tasks and duties during training. This is more effective than simply reading or passively listening. Feedback is critical to help learners establish their competence level and adjust their effort. There are numerous sources of performance feedback during training. Trainers, fellow trainees, gauges on equipment or tools like a speedometer, and the trainee themselves are all possible ways to provide information to the trainee. Feedback after training is also necessary to reinforce the training content. On the job, the trainee's supervisor or coworkers can observe the trainee and provide feedback to help the trainee improve performance. Repeated practice, even after the learner has mastered the training content, is referred to as overlearning. Consider how most adults who drive perform many functions without consciously thinking of them as a result of constant repetition and practice. Overlearning produces improvement in learner retention. The most elementary way in which people learn, and one of the best, is through behavioral modeling, which involves copying someone else's behavior. The use of behavioral modeling is particularly appropriate for skill training, in which the trainees must both use knowledge and practice. It can aid in the transfer of skills and the use of those skills by those who are trained. The error-based examples method involves sharing with learners what can go wrong if they do not use their training properly. The after-action review process is a powerful method of identifying decisions and actions taken during an event and evaluating their effectiveness. This type of training uses real cases to emphasize the importance of appropriate decision-making. The concept of reinforcement is based on the law of effect, which states that people tend to repeat responses that give them a positive reward and avoid actions associated with negative consequences. Closely related is an instructional strategy called immediate confirmation, which is based on the idea that people learn best if they receive reinforcement and feedback as soon as possible after exhibiting a response. Immediate confirmation corrects errors that, if made and not corrected through the training, might establish an undesirable pattern and would need to be unlearned. Transfer occurs when trainees actually use the knowledge and information they learned in training once they get back to the job. The amount of training that effectively gets transferred to the job is estimated to be relatively low, especially given all the time and money spent on training. But effective transfer of training has to meet 2 conditions. Let's take a look. First, the trainees can take the material learned in training and apply it to the job context in which they work. And second, employees maintain their use of learned material over time. Transfer of training is influenced by many things done before, during, and after training. Offering trainees an overview of the training content and how it links to the strategy of the organization seems to help with both short-term and longer-term training transfer. Another helpful approach is to ensure that the training mirrors the job context as much as possible. One of the most consistent factors in training transfer is the support new trainees receive from their supervisors and peers to use the new skills when they return to the job. Supervisor support of training, Feedback from the supervisor and supervisor involvement in training are powerful influences in transfer. Finally, accountability helps transfer of training from class to job. Accountability is the extent to which someone expects the learner to use the new skills on the job and holds them responsible for doing so. Internal training generally addresses topics specific to the organization and its jobs. Such training is popular because it saves the cost of sending employees away or paying outside instructors. Skill-based technical training is frequently conducted within organizations, and training materials are often created internally. Because of rapid changes in technology, building and updating technical skills may become critical internal training needs. 3 specific types of internal delivery options will be discussed here: informal training, on-the-job training, and cross-training. One source of instruction is informal training, which occurs through interactions and feedback among employees. Much of what employees know about their jobs they learn informally from asking questions and getting advice from other employees and their supervisors rather than going to formal training programs. Informal learning often occurs spontaneously when an employee identifies a need for knowledge or skills and seeks out training on the spot from an internal guru. The most common type of training at all levels in an organization is on-the-job training, known as OJT, because it's flexible and relevant to what employees do. Well-planned and well-executed OJT can be effective. In contrast with informal training, which occurs spontaneously, on-the-job training should be planned. The trainer must be able to both teach and show the employees what to do. When people are trained to do more than one job, theirs and someone else's, cross-training is occurring. Cross-training offers the organization more flexibility in assigning workers to tasks and can ensure uninterrupted production. Effective internal training programs have the potential to be good for both the employer and the employee. External training, or training that takes place outside the organization, is used extensively by organizations of all sizes. Organizations use external training if they lack the capacity to train workers internally or when many people need to be trained quickly. External training may be the best option in smaller firms because of limitations in the size of training efforts and in the number of employees who need various types of specialized training. Whatever the size of the organization, external training provides these advantages. It may be less expensive for an employer to have an outside trainer conduct training in areas where internal training resources are limited. The organization may have insufficient time to develop internal training materials. The staff may not have the necessary level of expertise for the subject matter in which training is needed, and employees can learn from participants from other organizations. Many employers of all sizes outsource training to external training firms, consultants, and other entities. Perhaps up to 1/3 of all training expenditures go to these outside training sources. The reasons more outside training is not used may be related to cost concerns and a greater desire to link training to specific organizational strategies. Some employers pay for additional education for their employees. Typically, the employee pays the cost of a course that's part of attainment of a college degree and is reimbursed upon successful completion of the course. The funds paid by the employer are considered non-taxable income for the employee up to the amount set by federal laws. Whether training is delivered internally or externally, appropriate training must be chosen. E-learning refers to the use of web-based technology to conduct training online. E-learning is popular with employers because it offers cost savings and access to more employees. Training conducted with some kind of learning technology is likely to continue to increase. Almost 30% of learning hours today are totally technology-based, according to the Association for Talent Development, and e-learning is preferred by workers under the age of 30. Online training should be designed to overcome common problems such as low usage rates and high attrition. In general, if learners believe that the training will be useful and easy to use, they're more likely to enroll and complete online courses. Online training is particularly useful in a model called the flipped classroom. Before meeting for a face-to-face session, all trainees complete an online learning module. The classroom session is then devoted to hands-on activities, questions and answers about content, and project work. Massive open enrollment online courses are the latest version of online learning platforms. Some prestigious universities offer these courses for free. Completion of the course does not earn a student a degree, but individuals seeking specific content may find them sufficient. Many college and university classes use some form of internet-based course support. Hundreds of college professors use various packages to make their lecture content available to students. These packages enable vital chat and electronic file exchange among course participants and enhance instructor-student contact. Similarly, many large employers use interactive two-way television to present classes. This medium allows an instructor in one place to see and respond to a class in a number of other locations. With a fully configured system, employees can take courses from anywhere in the world. Webinars are also becoming a popular type of web-based training. Simulations seek to reproduce parts of the real world so they can be experienced and manipulated, and learning can occur. From highly complicated systems that replicate difficult landing situations for pilots to programs that help medical trainees learn to sew sutures, simulations allow for safe training while the risks associated with failure are high. Games, on the other hand, are exercises that entertain and engage. They may or may not resemble the real world of work, but can sometimes be used to illustrate points in training. The future for workplace games is bright. Over 70% of companies will have at least one gamified application in the near future. Games are used to motivate and engage learners, and often use achievement badges, levels that must be cleared, and other rewards. Simulations and games provide a platform to increase engagement in learning. M-learning, the use of mobile technology to conduct training, requires a sound strategy. Who are the learners you hope to reach with M-learning? Determine the learner's goals, work environment, for example, remote and lots of travel, and technology competence levels. What material or information do learners need to have on mobile devices? Are videos or audio lessons better? Are metrics being used to measure mobile learning success? What operating systems will be used? Will employees be permitted to use their own devices? Consider security issues related to access. Learning content should be designed specifically for M-learning activities. Brief amounts of information that can be easily digested are most appropriate for mobile device users who are typically learning on the go. Training evaluation compares post-training results to the pre-training objectives of managers, trainers, and trainees. Too often, training is conducted with little thought towards measuring outcomes and then evaluating it to determine if it was effective. Since training is both time-consuming and costly, it should be evaluated. There are 4 levels at which training can be evaluated. They are reaction, learning, behaviors, and results. Organizations evaluate trainees' reaction levels by conducting interviews with or administering questionnaires to the trainees. Assume that 30 managers attend a 2-day workshop on effective interviewing skills. A reaction level measure could be gathered by having the managers complete a survey asking them to rate the value of the training, the style of the instructors, and their perceived usefulness of the training. Evaluating learning can be conducted by measuring how well trainees have learned facts, ideas, concepts, theories, and attitudes. Tests on training material are commonly used for evaluating learning, and they can be given both before and after training to provide scores that can be compared. If test scores indicate learning problems, then instructors get feedback and courses can be redesigned so that content can be delivered more effectively. Of course, learning enough to pass a test does not guarantee that trainees will remember the training content months later or that it will change their on-the-job behaviors. Evaluating training at the behavioral level means measuring the effect of training on the job performance through observing workers on the job. For instance, the managers who participated in the interviewing workshop might be observed conducting actual interviews of applicants for jobs in their departments. If the managers ask questions as they were trained and use appropriate follow-up questions, then behavioral indicators of the effectiveness of the interviewing training exist. Employers evaluate results by measuring the effect of training on the achievement of organizational objectives. Since results such as productivity, turnover, quality, time, sales, and costs are relatively concrete, this type of evaluation can be done by comparing records before and after training. For the managers who attended our interviewing training, evaluators could gather records of the number of individuals hired compared with the number of employment offers made before and after training. The difficulty when measuring results is pinpointing whether changes are actually the result of training or other major factors. Training results can be examined through cost-benefit analysis, which compares costs and benefits associated with training. There are 4 stages in calculating training costs and benefits. First, determine training costs. Consider direct costs such as design, trainer fees, materials, facilities, and other administrative activities, and indirect costs such as trainee time away from work. Second, identify potential saving results. Consider employee retention, better customer service, fewer work errors, quicker equipment changeovers, and other productivity factors. Third, compute potential savings. Gather data on the performance results and assign dollar costs to each of them. And fourth and finally, conduct cost and saving benefit comparisons. Evaluate the costs per participant, the savings per participant, and how the costs and benefits relate to business performance numbers. Training is often expected to produce a return on investment. Too often, though, a particular training regimen is justified because someone liked it rather than on the basis of resource accountability. ROI simply divides the return produced because of the training by the cost or investment of the training. In addition to evaluating training internally, some organizations use benchmark measures to compare it with training done in other organizations. To do benchmarking, HR professionals gather data on training in their organization and compare them with data and training in other organizations in the same industry and of companies of a similar size. Training evaluation is the process by which you can determine if you have met those objectives and whether there's a better or cheaper way to do so in the future. The most obvious way to evaluate training effectiveness is to determine whether the employees can perform according to the standard after attending the training. If competency is measured before and after training, the results will indicate whether the training made any difference. Organizations invest billions of dollars and countless hours training employees. These investments should support the goals of the organization and result in benefits to both the employees and the company. Thoughtful design, delivery, and evaluation of training offer the greatest probability for achieving success.